And despite the fact that it outlines a whole host of new attacks, I think that some young people might actually have breathed a sigh of relief. Why? Because for now at least, the Tories have held back from completely scrapping housing benefit for under 25s. And I think we have to say what a time we're living in when we're supposed to be grateful that in one fell swoop a whole generation haven't been forced out of their homes. But the risk isn't off the table. They're still threatening to do it possibly in the budget in May. And even if they don't, the housing situation, as Paul's outlined, particularly for young people and particularly in London, is getting worse and worse. They promised the Olympics would mean investment and jobs. Instead, it meant rent increases and evictions as landlords try to make a quick profit. The 2011 census data that was released this week showed that now in London, the number of private rented households is more than the number of people with mortgages. Because house prices across the capital have bucked the national trends and continue to rise. But banks won't look at young people when it comes to mortgages, and most of us can't rely on our parents, which is what the government seems to suggest we should do. And I think it's no wonder that they think that's what we should do, given their own privileged backgrounds. And the onslaught on benefits that Paul's outlined means that support is crumbling. So nationally, we're in a situation now where there's 1.6 million 16 to 40-year-olds forced to live with their parents. So it's those things that made Youth Fight for Jobs decide to set up a campaign around these issues, which we called Young Londoners Forced Out, Fight Back. And we've got what I think are some very simple demands. Cap rents at an affordable level so that everyone can afford somewhere to live. Get local councils to step in to prevent people being evicted if they fall into rent arrears. Start council-run letting agents so that we know we're not being ripped off or lied to. Use the housing built for the Olympics to be affordable council housing. Introduce a living minimum wage with no lower rates for young people. A huge number of those claiming housing benefit are working, as Paul says, but because of low wages, they have to top that up to be able to pay their rent. Increasing wages combined with lowering rents is the best way, actually, to reduce the benefit bill. Reverse all cuts to housing benefit, which has already been slashed before they dare to do the big thing of scrapping it completely for under 25s. Pay the same benefits to everyone. At the moment, young people are entitled to less, but I say we don't get cheaper bills, why should we get less benefits? And maybe most importantly, invest in a mass programme of building quality council housing to create jobs and alleviate the housing crisis. And as soon as we launched this campaign, the Forced Out campaign, we had a really fantastic response. And I don't think that's that surprising really. More and more people are angry about the housing situation. Yes, because it's increasing homelessness. Yes, because it's pushing people into poverty. Yes, because it's forcing working class people to live in squalor. But also, I think, because for many of us, it's simply the final straw. Given all the other attacks we're under, why shouldn't we be able to have a decent place to live? We're in the middle of the worst recession since the 1930s, and the consequences of that for working class people are still becoming clear. Only 10% of the planned cuts have been implemented so far, and I think we'd all say that's quite enough. Around the world, £5,000 billion has been given by governments to the banks to try and bail them out. But they nationalised the losses of the banks and kept the profits in private hands, essentially handing our money to big businesses and bankers who are making huge bonuses for themselves again. And now those very same governments claim that there's nothing left for what is needed by the mass of the population. Yet despite the claims that we're all in it together, it's not the bankers or the CEOs who are now being asked to pay for the crisis. Paul gave the figures of the increase in income in wealth of the 1,000 richest people and their total net worth. And in fact, the total net worth of the richest 1,000 people in Britain is enough to wipe out the deficit in one go. And meanwhile, by the end of this year, 250,000 people are expected to have used emergency food banks because they're going hungry. 83% of teachers say that they see children arrive at school in the morning hungry. Because in Britain, the Condemned government is prescribing endless austerity as a supposed remedy for the crisis. And particularly for us as young people, our future is looking pretty bleak. Imagine being a school student today. You face cuts to your school's budget, you face your school being forced to become an academy where a private company can decide that you don't even need qualified teachers to teach you anymore. The government's moving the goalposts in exams to make it harder for you to be able to carry on in further and higher education. And if you do manage to get through all that, to keep your head down like they tell you you should, and to get to college, well, they've scrapped EMA, which was a maximum of £30 a week that made all the difference for working class students. If you scrape by that to get through college, to get the good grades that they promise you will open all the doors, where do you go next? To university? £9,000 a year fees are enough to put anyone off. And last week it was revealed that the actual cost of a degree, taking into account the interest that you have to pay on loans, is expected to be more like £100,000. And when fees were introduced, David Willits, the universities minister, said that it would be worth it because graduates over their lifetimes earn an average of an extra £100,000. Well, that wiped out in one go. And universities are facing huge cuts too. Courses deemed not profitable enough stopped, subsidised childcare closed, resources slashed to breaking point. So maybe you decide university is out of the question. So you try and get a job. But the government's slashing jobs left, right and centre. Hundreds of thousands are going from the public sector. They told us the private sector would pick up the slack. But 5 years into the recession, there's no sign at all of that. In fact, every week it seems like a new shop disappears from the high street. So you end up joining the 1 million other people in the dole queue. Talent, skills, enthusiasm, all going to waste. And even that isn't enough for them, because they're slashing benefits, they're demonising us as scroungers, and they're forcing unemployed people to work for free for big companies or risk having their benefits stopped completely. But I'm not saying all this to depress us all, because it's not being accepted by people lying down. Young people in particular are fighting back. At the end of 2010, hundreds of thousands of students, all the way from 12-year-old school students to 30-year-olds doing PhDs, marched, walked out and occupied against the increase in tuition fees and the scrapping of EMA. We didn't win, mainly I'd say because the National Union of Students didn't give the lead that they should have done, but it was a glimpse of a willingness to fight, and the students were on the streets again just last month. And that's being seen across society. Disabled people have chained their wheelchairs together across the roads in protest at draconian attacks on their benefits and support services. Anti-cuts campaigners have occupied town halls against the cuts to libraries, social workers, nursery nurses and so on. Millions of public sector workers have taken strike action to defend their pensions. Others have walked out over job losses. The issue of public sector pay is bubbling under the surface. And it's that type of struggle that can stop the cuts, and we need to unite it all together. Young people fighting for their future, community campaigners fighting for their services, and most importantly, workers bringing the country to a halt in defence of their jobs and the services they provide. And that's why the Socialist Party is campaigning for a 24-hour general strike against austerity. We need strong action to stop this government in its tracks, to bring it down and to stop all the cuts. But we have to go further than that. Because I'd actually argue that even before the crisis and before the cuts, this system hasn't worked for the majority of ordinary people. Why do millions of people all over the world not have access to safe drinking water? Why do thousands die in wars over resources that they never get to see the benefit of? Why in the US, supposedly the richest country in the world, do people die every year from treatable health problems because they can't afford insurance? Because instead of being planned in the interest of the majority, society is run in the interest of the profits of the 1%. They get richer and we get poorer. It's that 1% that the condemned government, with their Oxbridge degrees and their mansions, represent. In 2011, for every £1 earned by workers, top executives earned £102. But they tell us we have no choice. They tell us we have to let Starbucks pay only as much tax as they choose, but we have to let them drive down wages and attack maternity benefits, because companies like Starbucks are the ones who invest in jobs and create wealth. But they're not investing. There's £800 billion sitting in the banks of big business in Britain alone because they can't see a way to make a quick profit. And they don't create wealth either. That's us, the working class. We produce things in factories, we drive the trains, we run the hospitals and the schools. So we need a system run in our interests, run by the 99% for the 99%. And I think that system is a socialist one, where all the resources in society are collectively and democratically run by ordinary people for the benefit of ordinary people. And I think I'd echo Paul's call, if you agree with that, to join the Socialist Party today if you're not already a member. Thanks.
Thank you. Sorry. Firstly, we're going to stay seated. Sorry. That's okay.
Yeah, sure.